do you feel like someone is wrong, or it is just morally wrong for someone to be transgender? If that's an easier question to answer, Reverend Will, Reverend Horn, could you help me? Would you consider that to be wrong?
I do not. I do not consider people who are transgender to be wrong. And let me explain to you. And again, I have spent my life literally since the age of 11. I'm 54 years old now. I've spent my life studying this, not for the purpose of arguing or debating or any of those kinds of things. Two reasons. Number one, I needed to understand these matters of sexuality and orientation and gender expression for my own survival. Because when I recognized at 11 years old that I wanted to be a Christian, and I wanted to invite Jesus into my heart, and I wanted to live a Christian life, it was also the same year that I discovered that I was attracted to the same gender. Okay. And so what I did is dedicated my life to trying to understand this so that I could survive. And so I got 43 years in the game. I've studied this. Okay. And so I'm not here as an apologist for gay people or transgender people or any of those things. What I'm trying to do is speak objectively, being able to hold the Bible in one hand, but also hold millions of pages of studied and peer-reviewed work as it relates to human sexuality and gender expression. I have to hold both in my hands. And so when we understand what gender is, and this is the problem, most people don't understand what gender really is. Gender is not a penis or a vagina. Gender happens here. Okay, so we got to understand that. And I know that may be hard for some, okay? But gender is not necessarily tied to your genitalia. And so when we understand what gender dysmorphia is, again, if we believe the doctor as it relates to our high blood pressure and our diabetes, we need to also understand what the doctors have to say about gender dysmorphia, okay? And so, again, I don't want to go too far, I guess, down.
So you don't
No,
believe
no,
in
no,
gender?
no. That's cool. Actually, I wanna get, because listen, Pastor Ramel's been quiet for a minute. I appreciate you for going ahead and answering that question, Reverend Horn. But just give me perspective on this too, because we wasn't planning on going here, but I think it's an important topic as well. As again, LGBTQ, there's a spectrum of different. I guess what would we call it? Is it lifestyles or orientations that I want to actually speak for? But on your case, Pastor Ramel, would you consider that to be right or wrong?
Being trans, is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir.
No, I do not consider it to be wrong. So, a couple of things. One, I don't want to repeat what Reverend Will has already offered, but I'll add to it by saying that, so let's use, for example, intersex people. There are people who are, and this is only one way of being intersex, but let's use this as an example. There are people who are born with both a penis and a vagina. And back in the day, what people would do was the doctor would have the parents decide, which one do you all want to, you want me to, excise the penis and build out the vagina? What would you want me to sew up the vagina? What do you want to do? And so they would decide the gender of the baby, the parents would, after birth. Lately, that has gone out of fashion, thank God, right? And they no longer do that, to my knowledge, at least in the United States. But now, as people grow older and they develop their own identity and awareness of who they are internally, they can choose to go, and if they choose to do this at all, go and have surgery that will align their physical body with what they know internally to be who they are. Now, the problem with so many Christians, fundamentalist conservatives, is that we are very sight-oriented. We don't care to think deeply about any of this stuff. It's all about what's at the surface. I only care. Now, what's interesting is when it comes to intersex people, it's easier for us to wrap our minds around a person choosing their gender on the basis of what's inside of them when we can see with our physical eyes, oh, they have a penis and a vagina. So therefore, I can understand them making the choice to decide based on what's inside of them what their gender is. Technically, we're not even talking about gender, we're talking about sex, because there's a difference between gender and sex, but that's a whole other can of worms. But because we don't see both a penis and a vagina in most cases when it comes to someone who's trans, we only see one set of genitalia. Now we have completely closed our eyes to the and closed our minds to the prospect of a person's internal dynamic determining what their real sex is, irrespective of what their anatomy is, as we would offer, as most people, I guess, would offer with intersex people. The problem, though, and science is still figuring this out, so this is a work in progress, there are people with one set of sex genitalia, but their chromosomes, which we can't see with our physical eyes, that has to be done with microscopes and things like that, but their chromosomes are not associated with the gender, with the sex of their genitalia. And so we don't know exactly what causes transgenderism, but what we do know is that trans people are telling us this is their real experience. And there's an arrogance and a conceit to tell somebody else on the basis of what I see with my eyes, not putting any science to it at all, but just on the basis of what I see with my eyes, that this is who you have to be. And to not be it is a violation of God's will, when you're actually putting God on your side rather than you coming to his side, because God never actually told you that being transgender was a sin.
You know, Pastor, it's interesting, man. This is where the conversation really gets interesting. Because personally, I don't necessarily look at it as, you know, you necessarily going based off the eyes and, you know, saying exactly what you communicate. I think it's just based off, it's really just communicating that what God created in his nature, God inherently made a mistake. I think it's more so what's being communicated when
I have a question for you.
Well, no, you can absolutely ask your question. Let me actually just go here though, because I think this is related to the original point where Marcus was saying, where does this stop, right? Because I think if we keep pushing the envelope to let people go based on how they feel, we've even seen transgender, we've seen many cases where they've regretted making the decision.
Right, and
they've changed how they felt in that moment, because we know feelings are really fleeting. And I'm going to be honest, personally, on a personal level, I've made some of the worst decisions in my life based on how I felt in that moment in time. So I think the question is at this point, how far, if it's based on how we feel, I do think pedophilia now is I know it sounds crazy, but that is a realistic conversation, because there's even an organization that is fighting to get the legal limit of the age of a woman you can have sex with to be dropped. And then once that happens, it's going to be a couple more laws put in place. And they actually even trying to add a P to the LGBTQIA because it's like
organizations fighting.
There's organizations fighting for these things.
In Germany, they even
so that this is not really that crazy of a conversation when we're saying how far does this go if we as people don't draw a line in the sand. So do you not think that at some point we should eventually clearly state what is right or wrong?
So yes. So okay, so a couple things. One, how far do we go? Number one, fear of this make-believe slippery slope cannot be how we decide what is right or wrong. But if we want to say how far do we go, scripture is very easy to work with in this regard. Jesus himself actually said the chief commandments, the most important, the top commandments upon which hang all the law and the prophets. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. When we go to 1 Corinthians 13, that we call the love chapter, and see a description of what love looks like, then all these other things that Marcus or anybody else wants to throw into the conversation in order to try to draw an analogy between homosexuality and bestiality, or homosexuality and pedophilia, all of them are absolutely taken out of the conversation by this description of love. And so if we make love the actual rubric, right, the place where we draw the line, it is not, love does not seek its own, right? It is not selfish. So how can pedophilia fit it meet the standard of love? How can bestiality meet the standard of love? How can someone or something that is not capable of making a consented adult, matured, consented uh, um, choice toward sexual activity or marriage, how can that possibly be consistent with love? And so we just draw the line there. But instead of drawing the line at love, we choose to draw it on these arbitrary personal theologies that we have developed about what we think the Bible actually says about this. And unfortunately, time doesn't permit us to deal with the Bible itself. Like I said earlier, that's one of the conversations we're having, the nature of Scripture and why we have it in the first place. But then it also doesn't give us the opportunity, time, which is why we need to really have this conversation multiple times, to delve more specifically into the specific texts that Brother Marcus has raised, Pastor Marcus has raised, that he believes are condemning homosexuality. Because if we're able to do a deep dive into Leviticus, do a deep dive into Romans, which he mentioned earlier, which I really wanted to get to because he totally took that out of context. If we're able to do a deep dive into those, then we can lay a fuller foundation. But barring that, I would say if we just start off by making love the rubric, by making love the line, and I'm not just saying emotional love, I'm not just talking about affection, because then I can already hear the counter argument. Well, a pedophile says he loves the girl. Well, I'm talking about the way love is described in Scripture, where love is patient and love is kind and love is selfless. The pedophilia, bestiality, these things are not even consistent with that. The only reason they're brought into these conversations is to try to use some kind of extreme example in order to scare people into subjecting themselves to particular ways of interpreting Scripture, and it's not legitimate.
But you use an extreme example. Intersex is about 0.018.
But they still exist.
Oh, no. But that you just went against your own argument. Number two, that's why you never seen an intersex person get themselves pregnant, because usually one of those appendages don't work. So they usually take the one that doesn't work away. But you still have not answered the line, because we're not just making up an extreme argument. I'm going based off what you guys have been saying the whole night, that sex, right, is not just for reproduction, it's for pleasure. So where do I draw the line? If I just want to have 10 women, if somebody wants to sleep with a dog, if someone wants to sleep with a kid, where is the determined? You're brushing it.
I just told you where the line was. I said it was at love.
Is it wrong for a man to want to sleep with a girl, a man to want to sleep with a dog, all that kind of
yes, those are wrong.
Why? But why do you say it's wrong?
Because they violate the clear standard of love.
How? People love their love.
I just told you that. I literally just said that. So you weren't listening.
But I'm saying they love their dog. So how is it violating love?
Okay.
Why would it be a violation is what I want to know.
Well, I already answered that. So I have a question to ask you. I'll repeat my answer, but then I actually have a question to ask you as well as the host, because he initially brought this up to me. So I'll repeat my answer. When you apply love, and then I use the example of 1 Corinthians 13, because plenty of people use love to justify all kinds of things when it's used in a generic way. Okay. But I said we can actually see a pretty good description of what love actually looks like when we look at 1 Corinthians 13. And we apply, if we use that as a standard, it can create some pretty good lines in the sand as to how far, quote unquote, I don't even like to even use that language in this conversation, but how far, quote unquote, is too far, because it is a violation. We're talking about two consenting adults entering to a loving covenant by choice. That absolutely has nothing to do with bestiality, and it also has nothing to do with pedophilia. Now, having answered your question for a second time, I'd like to offer you a question.
Still the answer.
My question is, well, let me ask my question now, because I've already tried to answer yours twice. So my question is, using intersex as an example, and again, there are many forms of intersexuality, but we'll just use the one about both sets of genitalia, but there are other forms as well. I use the example about chromosomes and things like that. But using that example, a person comes out of the womb with a penis and a vagina. According to you all's understanding of God creating people and us staying the way God created us, then did God make a mistake?
Sin entered the world. When God created everything, it was good. When sin entered the world, that's where things got messed up. That's why when we go back to heaven, there's not going to be these flaws. The earth is flawed because of sin. It's simple.
Okay, so let me ask this question. So did God make a mistake?
No, God didn't make a mistake.
Yeah,
Okay,
I don't think
so
God
if a
can make. I
person
don't think God
chooses-
can make mistakes.
So if a person chooses, who is intersex, if a person chooses to have surgery to align their anatomy with who they believe that they are internally, and I'm talking specifically about intersex people, are they abominations? Are they sinning by going against the way that they were born?
Most of the time when they have those surgeries, it's 0.018. The
They
surgery
still exist.
Yes, but you said don't use these extreme arguments. You're using an extreme
That's
argument
not extreme.
with it to do with abortion.
These are real people.
Mathematically, there's not that many of them. So no, that is an extreme argument. That is a very rare case. And so in most cases, when that does happen, one of those appendages usually doesn't work. And so they usually have a surgery to remove if it doesn't work, if it's not active, right? If it's dead, right? There's a lot of reasons for that. There could have been some kind of the twins and things. There's a lot, like people are born with two heads and all that kind of stuff. So usually they do is they take the one that is not active away.
I know